Is the world horrible or great? Is mankind good or bad? Are things getting better or getting worse? Are we heading toward catastrophe, toward hell in a handbasket, or are we heading toward paradise? 2023 is coming to an end and 2024 is coming up. That's tomorrow. And I've been thinking about things. I'm generally kind of outwardly a positive guy and inwardly a depressed, guy, always seeing disaster around the corner. But this year has been really a turbulent year in many ways. Israel and Gaza, ongoing war in Ukraine, Biden and Trump, you being indicted, being taken off the ballot in Colorado, facing jail. It's unusual for the justice system in the U.S. to be politicized in that way. For one party to go against after the other party, using their political power over the justice system, using the laws to get at the candidate instead of using political arguments. So the part of the race we're seeing, which is coming up, Biden and Trump in 24, is dominated by trying to get rid of Trump, not by appealing to the voter, but by manipulating the law. And whether Trump is guilty of crimes or not, it doesn't really matter. It seems to me that the worst thing you can do in a democracy is weaponize the law when you are in power against a political opponent. I think that is a horrible, horrible thing. And that scares me. So a lot of things have scared me this year. And it's troubling for me because I don't want to live in a world that is going to disaster, that is just going to hell. And I worry about whether we're heading to hell or not, and I worry about Trump winning the next election. And, what is he going to do for revenge? He's going to get revenge. Is he going to become a Hitler, which he didn't become in his first term? I was afraid in his first term that he would become like a Hitler. He didn't. But this time, he may get revenge on those enemies if he gets into power. And the more political problems he has, I think the more votes he's going to get. If he ends up in jail, I think he's going to win because, just because people are saying, hey, you can't do that. And I think a lot of American citizens are of the opinion that you cannot do that. So, looking back, I looked up some statistics. Is the world bad or is it good? Here's what I found. Not just Trump and Biden. That's just, icing on the cake. Worldwide, and I got a little piece of paper here. Negative. War has risen since the 1980s. The number of wars, the number of armed conflicts has risen since the 1980s. So we're heading in a bad direction in terms of war. In 1980, it was in 1989 there were 80 armed conflicts around the world. In 2022, there was 180 armed conflicts in the world, and according to a lot of statisticians, there are very seldom fewer than 100 conflicts in the world. So it's always very high. Armed conflicts, wars among nations are always very high. In Africa, the biggest chunk of wars that we have are in Africa, and surprisingly, the biggest chunk of armed conflicts are civil wars, interestingly. Hate crime has risen. People, politicians are always saying hate crime is on the rise, and that's the fault of the other party, And so I looked it up. I said, I don't think that hate crime is on the rise. My feeling is that crime is getting lower all the time. But it's true. Hate crime is on the rise. Since the reporting on hate crime has changed in 2015, it's steadily risen. And in 2022, there were almost 800 more hate crimes than in 2021. Hate crime is on the rise. That's the negative part. And that's very discouraging. But then I thought, okay, well, hold in. Hate crimes is just part of the whole story. What about violent crime in general? And that is falling. Surprisingly, it spiked. Violent crime and murders spiked during the pandemic. So that went up. And since then, it's been falling again. In 1993, there were 80 violent crimes in the U.S. per 1,000 citizens or 1,000 population. In 2022, there were only 16.5 crimes. That's 1/4 of the number in 1993. So that's a huge drop. That's huge. The number of murders rose during the pandemic. Per 100,000 citizens in 1990, it was 9.5 murders. That dropped down to 2009, 5 murders. It dropped by half in the 2000s, and then it rose again in the 2010s and 20s. In 2022, it was 6.8 murders per 100,000 population. That is so 1990 was 9.5 murders per 100,000, and in 2022 last year it was 6.8. So that's a drop in general, even though there was a rise after the pandemic, and it's not as good as it could be, but it's dropped. And this year, 2023, the numbers aren't in yet, but statisticians are expecting another drop of 13%. So a huge drop. So in other words, after the spike in the pandemic, violent crime and murders are going back down again. But then I thought, well, isn't that a contradiction? Violent crime, hate crime is up, violent crime is down. That seems like a contradiction, right? But when you hear hate crimes, you think violent crimes, you think murders. But hate crimes are seldom violent crimes. It's it's abuse, it's threats, it's sometimes crimes against property, it's bullying. Those are or stalking or something like that. Those are the hate crimes, the bulk of the hate crimes. Hate crimes that come to murder or to real violence are very rare. So that explains why hate crimes can rise while violent crimes fall. And looking at these hate crimes, they spike in election years. And, you got to wonder why that is. And I can only think that it's because of politicians. Because politicians now get votes by identity politics. And identity politics pit one group of people against another group of people, whether it's race or, sexual or religious or whatever. And so the politicians are driving, I believe the politicians are driving the rise in hate crimes because they need it to get our votes. They need to outrage us in some way, and they need to divide us and pit us against one another verbally and spiritually, to hate each other and to identify ourselves only as a group, a part of a group, and not as an individual. And the other guy as part of a group who is ruining the world, is bringing the end of the world, is bringing catastrophe, is the world is going to hell because of that group. And I really think politicians and politics are driving the hate crimes because they need our division. They need our hatred of each other to win. That's my view on politics, frankly. It's not good. So that, even though I'm trying to make the positive case for the development of history right now, that's the negative. In general, I have a negative view of politics. Unemployment in the U.S., the U.S. unemployment numbers, in 1993, it was 6.8% of people were unemployed. That spiked in 2010. And in 2023, it's 3.6%. So it dropped by half since our unemployment now is incredibly low. 3.6% unemployed. That's really, really low. And you can argue that, maybe they're McJobs or something or whatever, but that's a general statistic, and it reflects all the different parts of the unemployment or the employment market. 3.6% is an incredibly low unemployment rate. in the Great Depression, it was up to 25, 30%. In the 80s, I remember it was like 10% up to even higher than that. Is that true? I may be wrong in that. Okay, but so 1993, it was 6.8%. 2023, it is 3.6%. That's a huge drop. Internationally, deaths in war. First of all, wars. I just said that wars were on the rise. Deaths in the wars, are difficult to say whether they're on the rise or falling. In 2005, there were 20,000 deaths by war or armed conflict. In 2022, there were more than 10 times as much, 240. Sorry, 240,000. So 20,000, 205, in 2005, and 2,400,000 in 2022. And now we have, of course, Ukraine is about 80,000 deaths up to now. Gaza is only 20,000 deaths up to now, but that's new. But the reason that there were so many deaths in 2022 was the war in Ethiopia. The war in Ethiopia, right? I'm sure you all, just like I did, went out on the streets and demonstrated against the war in Ethiopia. Well, I just heard about it now, looking at the statistics. I didn't know there was a war in Ethiopia from 2000 to 2022, and about 100,000 people died there during that war. And so that drove the numbers up. So about half of that numbers in 2022, 20,000 in 2022, half of those numbers, 100,000 of the 240,000 were in Ethiopia. That war is over, so I expect it would be expectable that the numbers of death by war in 2023 will drop because that horrific war in Ethiopia is over. And I think Gaza cannot compare in number of deaths with that. So that's mixed, frankly. Number of deaths in war. When someone said, one of the things I read about war statistics is that it's very rare for wars, a number of armed conflicts in the world, to drop below 100 per year. So I think war is just a staple that we have to live with. Looks like it. But other good news, and this is from the New York Times, this is from Kristof in his yearly article in the New York Times, child deaths internationally, so infant deaths internationally, has dropped for the first time globally in the world, in the history of mankind, under 3.6%. So 3.6% of children under 5 die. 3.6%, that's nothing. That's very, very low. In the 1990s, it was double that amount. And then, of course, going back exponentially. So child deaths going down that low, that's incredible. When I was a kid in America, we talk about the deaths in African children starving in Africa. We still talk about that, and it's still terrible. There's still a lot of, all over the world, there's still a lot of tragedy, especially with children. But it's getting much better at rapid paces. It's not the world I live in now. It's not the world I lived in, grew up in the 70s and 80s. And then poverty worldwide also has dropped just almost under 8%. So a couple of years ago, the worldwide poverty in absolute numbers. So we're talking about people who, I don't know what the exact number is, but they're talking about, living on 50 cents a day or $1 a day, or, starving, having only, one meal every 2 days or something like that. So absolute poverty, real poverty, not just he is 10% poorer than the average, but real poverty. That dropped for the first time in the history of mankind a couple of years ago down to under 10%, and it has continued to drop. Now it's almost only 8% of the world population is living in absolute poverty, and that is amazing. I cannot stress enough how great that is. And even the thing about Trump and Biden, which really does scare me. it scares me, the idea that the weaponization of the justice system to decide a political democratic election is scary. And what scares me even more is that if Trump is put in jail, I think there will be a backlash and he will get elected. I think it will help him. And if it does help him and he does get elected after being put in jail, I'm afraid that he will do all the things that we were afraid he would do in his first term, but didn't do, that he will get back at those institutions that went after him, that he will dismantle or try to dismantle or abuse his power to dismantle certain democratic checks and balances. And I worry about that. His first term was much better than I expected it to be. In fact, famously, Biden has instituted some of his immigration policies that, he were referred to earlier as racist. But in that sense, I would not be afraid of a Trump reelection. But now that it's become so vicious and that institutions have been drawn into it, I'm afraid that Trump that this is changing Trump into the thing that we're afraid he is. But then I look back on history and I wonder, has this been done before? And of course it has. The Republicans weaponized the justice system to try to get rid of Clinton during his term, to impeach Clinton for having sex. How does that work? Having sex, that's not a political decision. But so they try to go past the voter and use the justice system to get rid of Clinton. And that was despicable, and it hobbled a presidency. He couldn't do what he wanted to do because he had to deal with that thing for much of his presidency, and it was terrible. So this is not the first time that the justice system has been weaponized for political reasons, and the Democrats are not innovators in that sense. And then if you look even back further in history, I didn't research the history of politics in America in this sense, but in my general readings about American politics and history, it can get vicious. There are extremes, and again there have been extremes, and again we've gotten over it. A duel. Alexander Hamilton was killed in a duel. He was murdered. That's extreme. And other countries, by the way, also go to extremes. Politics are always extreme in every country. They bring out the passion in us because we are worried about the state of our nation and where it's going. And that's a real worry that we have. And we have different opinions about it, and we're all trying to make it a better state. And we're afraid that the other guy with a different opinion is going to make it worse. So that always has, that always brings out the worst in us. Here in Germany, in recent years, there have been, an assassination, a murder for political purposes. The right is on the rise. There was in the pandemic, there was just like January 6th, or similar to January 6th, there was a group of protesters who tried to storm the parliament here in Germany. They were fought back, but they tried to storm the parliament, just like the crazy idiots in Washington on January 6th. So all nations have politics. In all nations are violent and extreme and passionate, and they always go up and down, and they're always scary. So even though there are all kinds of horrible things going on, and I agree that they're horrible and they scare me, I look at the world and I say, things have been worse in my lifetime. Things have been, in all of mankind, things have generally been worse. And we are living, in most ways, in in the best world we have ever lived in. This is the best place, the best time to live in forever. Whether it doesn't matter what identity you have, what group you're in, what politics, what your favorite politician tells you how much you're suffering. You are not suffering as much as your grandparents did. You are not suffering, and the world is not worse than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when your grandparents lived, much less in the Middle Ages. The world is a better place. We focus on the bad, and that's because we're afraid of the bad, but the world is getting better all the time. And you and me as an individual have more opportunities than we ever would have had at any other time. Even if we suffer, even if we've made stupid mistakes, we have more opportunities to make them better than ever before. It was really good. I cannot tell you how much good it did me to look at those statistics, because reading the newspapers and listening to the news, it's just, everything is just terrible and horrible. But in fact, this is just us being humans, and we're doing this being human thing better than we've ever done it before in history. It could be better, but it could be worse. I believe, and I'd like to drink to this, I believe in mankind. I believe that mankind has a tendency to move toward the good, even though we always take one step backwards. We're taking two steps forwards. I believe we are often stupid and make bad decisions, and every decision is a crapshoot. It could be wrong. I believe that we tend to make one more good decision than we make bad decisions. On average, I believe every time we suffer, every time there is a Holocaust, a genocide, a World War II, a 9/11, it will be followed by something a little bit better. I think every mistake we make, we learn from a little bit, even if we don't notice it. I believe the world is getting better, and we are becoming better human beings without knowing it. We just are, because it's in our nature to want the good and not want the bad. That's what my wish for you for the new year is, for 2024, that you make one more good decision than you make bad decisions. God bless you all.